My life before the incident was truly peaceful. I was an atheist believing in reason and science, convinced that humans could control their destiny through knowledge, effort, and planning. My days were orderly, a stable job, a happy family, and healthy, well-behaved children. I never felt the need to pray. Not once did I think about the presence of God or any deity. My faith was placed in tangible and demonstrable things. However, life sometimes has its own way of knocking on arrogant hearts. One morning, my child complained of fatigue and body aches. At first, I thought it was just a normal sickness that would pass in a few days of rest. I didn't pay much attention, continuing my work, believing that everything would be fine. But the unusual symptoms persisted day after day. The fatigue was prolonged, the pain appeared occasionally, making my child quiet, withdrawn, and listless. I started to worry. My reason, which had always taught me to seek logical explanations, was powerless this time. I took my child to many places for checkups, saw many doctors, and had numerous tests done, but no one could give a definitive diagnosis. As each day passed, the tension and unease seemed to spread into every corner of our house, making the atmosphere heavy. Then came a fateful day when the doctor called me into his private office. I looked into his eyes and realized something was wrong. His words struck me like lightning. "Your child has cancer. This is a terminal illness." My heart seemed to stop. The whole world froze. I felt that every foundation I had ever relied on had collapsed. Reason, science, knowledge, effort, all were powerless. I was lost in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and despair. I remembered who I was, a person who once believed that with diligence and wisdom, I could control everything. Now I realized that there are things beyond human capability, and I was completely helpless before the life of my precious child. A feeling of emptiness, disorientation, and loneliness flooded me. I looked at my child lying in the hospital bed with innocent eyes that didn't understand what was happening, and in my heart, pain was intertwined with extreme confusion. From that moment on, I knew that my life, the life I thought was perfect and under control, had been torn apart. I had no other choice but to confront the harsh truth. I had to find a way to overcome this despair, even though I didn't know where I would find the faith and strength. For the first time, I began to look at something I had previously ignored, a force beyond reason and science. And the biggest question appeared: is there a God or a higher power that can save my child? Right after hearing the bad news, I fell into a state I had never imagined. Long, sleepless nights became normal. I sat by my child's bed, watching every weak breath, every small movement, with a heart aching with pain. I wanted to do something, anything, to save my child, but everything was beyond my reach. The feeling of helplessness gradually seeped into every vein, making me cold and tired, not only physically, but also mentally. The days passed in extreme tension. Every time my child complained of pain, my eyes lit up with a fear I couldn't hide. I tried to stay calm in front of my family, smiling as if everything was fine. But inside, a psychological storm was raging. I started to doubt myself. Did I miss something? Do I have some responsibility for this? Why my child? These questions swirled in my head, finding no answers, leaving me more exhausted each day. Before, I was proud of my knowledge, my reason, believing that science and human effort could solve all problems. But now everything I had once believed in became meaningless. Money, knowledge, status, career, nothing could save my child. I felt so small and weak, a feeling I had never experienced in my life. The self-confidence I had built over many years suddenly vanished, replaced by confusion and despair. In my loneliest moments, I looked around and saw darkness spreading. Even the places that used to be safe havens, my home, my bed, my living room, were now empty and cold. I saw the fragility of life and the weakness of humans in the face of unpredictable challenges. Every night I listened to my child's breath, to the sound of that tiny heart beating fast. I told myself I had to be strong, had to find a way to save my child, but the very fear paralyzed me. I wondered, is there any way to get through this? And for the first time, I felt I needed something beyond reason, a supernatural strength that I had never believed in before. Those long days were the days I directly confronted my own limitations, realizing that no matter how knowledgeable and wise a person is, there are some things they cannot control. In my despair, I began to think that maybe I needed faith, even though I had rejected it before, to find a new source of strength. It was a period where pain, fear, and shattered hope intertwined, creating a chaotic feeling. But it was also at that moment that a small spark of light began to flicker. Invisible, but enough to urge me to keep going, even though I didn't know where. Day after day, I felt like I was standing on the edge of an abyss where fear, despair, and helplessness jostled for space. Every morning, I looked at my child with worried eyes, wondering if they would have the strength to get through the pain today. Every step in the hospital corridor felt heavy, as if I was carrying the whole world. I followed the doctors, attended every appointment, tracked test results and every treatment method, but inside, the feeling of helplessness clung to me like a relentless ghost. I remember the advice from my friends: be strong, trust in science, your child will be okay. They were right from a logical standpoint, but in that moment, reason was not strong enough to dispel the fear that was swirling within me. I knew that science has its limits. Every treatment method was a possibility, but there were no guarantees of success. Every time the test results didn't improve, the despair came back stronger, leaving me utterly exhausted. As an atheist, I had never thought about the presence of a deity or God. I was confident that the world operated according to explainable and controllable laws. But now, in this storm of despair, I realized that there are things that are far beyond human capability. The scientific faith I had relied on for so long seemed fragile in the face of a life-or-death challenge. The life of my little child. Every night when everything was quiet, I sat silently by my child's bed, watching them sleep. Their innocent eyes made my heart ache. I wondered if there was any way at all, to save my child. With every cry of pain, every time my child cried, I felt as if all hope was slipping away with those tears. I didn't know how to protect my child, and this helplessness brought me close to a breaking point. In my despair, I began to question myself. I once believed that humans could solve all problems with intellect and effort, but now all that self-confidence was shattered. I realized I was too small, too limited, and that there were things in life completely out of my control. That feeling of helplessness was not just the fear of the disease, but also the astonishment at the limits of humanity. These moments on the brink were truly terrifying. I went through each day with a chaotic state of mind, wanting to cry for help, wanting to give up, angry at fate, and scared for my child's future. I began to crave comfort, a guiding light, but I had never believed that anything other than reason and science could provide that. And it was while standing on the edge of that abyss that a question began to creep in. Had I overlooked something important? A supernatural power? A being who could save my child? I didn't know the answer, but for the first time in my life, I realized that maybe I needed to believe in something bigger, something beyond the control of reason. One night when my child was crying from the pain, I sat by the bed, my hands trembling as I placed them on my child's shoulder, my heart heavy. I didn't know how many more long nights like this I would have to endure, when my child's cries echoed as a reminder that all my efforts were still too small. I once thought I was rational enough to control life, but now everything I had relied on was meaningless in the face of my child's illness. In that moment of despair, something unusual happened. I suddenly whispered a prayer, clumsy and hesitant, something I had never done before. If you exist, God, please help me, save my child. The words floated away like a breath, weak and lost in the quiet room. I wasn't sure if anyone was listening, and I didn't know if that prayer meant anything to a supernatural being. But the strange thing was, right after I said it, a feeling of relief suddenly filled my heart. The feeling of complete despair was gone. Instead, I realized that I wasn't entirely alone. A fragile ray of hope flickered, gentle as a faint light in the dark night. I couldn't yet imagine who God was, or if he was truly present. But my heart began to open, accepting that there might be some power that could listen, comfort, and help. In the following nights, I repeated that prayer, even though it was still clumsy and I didn't know the right words to say. I said those words to myself, telling myself that if there was a God looking down, he could do something. Every time I prayed, the feeling of fear seemed to diminish a little. I began to feel a difference in my soul, less worry, less anger, and I started to believe that hope still existed, even if it was very small. The amazing thing was, for the first time in my life, I realized something. Faith doesn't have to be perfect or dazzling right away. It just needs a small beginning, a whisper, a tiny spark of light to guide the way. And from that moment on, my journey changed. I was still an atheist, but a new door had begun to open in my heart, a place where faith and hope could creep in, even if just through a small crack. I understood that not every prayer is answered immediately, and not every day will be bright. But for the first time, I felt that I was no longer standing alone on the edge of the abyss. There was a quiet call, a silent presence, reminding me that even in despair, there is still a faint light guiding the way. And I began to walk slowly, but with a shattered faith that a miracle could happen. In the days following that clumsy prayer, I began to notice strange, small, but meaningful things. One morning, as I was worrying about my child's test results, the doctor mentioned a piece of information I had never heard before, which coincidentally pointed to a treatment option I hadn't considered. At first, I thought it was just a random coincidence, but my heart began to wonder, could this be a sign, a reminder that I was not alone on this journey? A friend who was normally very busy unexpectedly called and offered sincere words of encouragement. They didn't know the details of my child's condition, but their words came at the very moment I felt most lost. I realized that, even though everything seemed meaningless, there were invisible hands touching my life in a miraculous way. One afternoon, while scrolling through social media as I waited for my child's appointment, I happened to see a Bible verse appear in a random post. I had never read those words before, but they seemed to speak directly to my heart: hope, peace, and salvation. My heart trembled, a feeling that was both strange and familiar. I wasn't sure if this was an answer from God or just a coincidence, but one thing I knew for sure: my soul was being touched. Something higher was present. These successive coincidences made me stop and think. I, a person who had once denied everything supernatural, was now beginning to feel something beyond reason. A faint light appeared in the darkness of despair that my child and I were going through. It wasn't bright or dazzling, but it was enough for me to realize there was a faith I had never thought of, a power that was silently guiding my every step. My mood began to change. I was still worried, still scared, but despair no longer completely dominated me. I learned to pay attention, to feel, and to open my heart to these small signs. I was no longer alone. There was something, even though I couldn't yet name it, that was present in my life, comforting and guiding. And in these moments, I began to understand something. Faith doesn't have to be perfect. It can start with small signs, from things that seem random but carry a deep message. I realized that to continue on the journey to save my child, I had to place my faith in a higher place, a power beyond human capability, and from there, hope could grow. Those faint lights were not yet a complete miracle, but they were strong enough for me to keep going, to keep praying, and to open my heart to something I had never believed in before. That even in the most profound despair, there is still a guiding light. One afternoon, as I was still lost in worry and despair, a friend invited me to a small prayer group. At first, I hesitated. I had never believed in God, had never entered a space like that. But deep down, a part of me longed to find a direction, some light to hold on to. I decided to go, even though my heart was full of apprehension and the fear of being disappointed. When I entered the small, warm room, I was overwhelmed by the quiet atmosphere. Yet it was full of love. People were sitting together, chatting, sharing, and praying. I felt like a stranger, as if I had stumbled into a world I had never seen before. But instead of a feeling of distance, a strange warmth crept in, making me want to listen and stay. I started to hear miraculous healing stories. One person told their own story about a seemingly insurmountable illness that was healed. Another mother talked about her child who also had a terminal illness like mine. But through faith and prayer, her child had a miraculous recovery. Her eyes shone with faith as she said, "He can do it for you too." For the first time, I felt something touch my soul. I couldn't name it, but it was no longer a theory or a hypothesis. Faith was no longer on a page or in logical advice, but was a lived experience, a real story, a light that could touch my heart. I felt myself being moved, my heart opening, even though there was still some doubt and fear. I started to participate more, listening to every testimony, observing the eyes of people who were once in despair, but were now full of hope. In them, I saw peace, strength, and faith, things I had never experienced in my life. Gradually, I realized that faith is not just about praying or reading the Bible, but also about experiencing, about witnessing miracles in real life, about a deep connection with something greater than humanity. These stories didn't explain all the pain, but they opened a path, a guide to let me know that I wasn't alone. I began to see that even if a miracle didn't happen to my child immediately, God's power, love, and presence were in my life, waiting to be received. I learned how to open my heart, how to listen, and how to believe that a miracle can happen at any time. That evening, I went home with a different feeling, both relieved and full of hope. I knew that the journey to save my child was not just about finding doctors or treatments, but also a spiritual journey where faith, love, and prayer could create miracles. I didn't fully understand miracles yet, but I had started to believe that they could happen, and that very faith would guide my child and me in the days to come. Day after day by the hospital bed, I clearly felt that all my efforts, worries, and calculations were powerless against my child's illness. Every treatment method, every piece of advice from doctors, friends, or specialists offered no certainty. I used to be a confident, rational person who could control everything, but now a feeling of helplessness enveloped me. In my heart, despair and fear seemed to be competing to pull me down, leaving me physically and mentally exhausted. One evening, after my child had a seizure of crying from pain, I sat by the bed, my hands trembling, tears streaming down my face. I uttered words I had never thought I would say. "I surrender my child to you. Please take care of and guide them." The words were clumsy, coming from a heart full of worry and helplessness. But strangely, immediately afterward, a feeling of peace spread throughout my body. It wasn't noisy or bright, just a deep sense of relief, as if the whole world had quieted down and given me a rare moment of rest. In that moment, I learned an important lesson. Letting go is not giving up, but realizing your own limitations and surrendering something that is beyond human capability. I no longer tried to control everything, no longer held on to endless fear and worry. Instead, I opened my heart, placing my faith in a higher power who was guiding me. And it was in that act of letting go that I found an inner strength I had never known before. I began to realize that trust doesn't always come with certainty or seeing immediate results. Trust is a process, a journey in which every step, however slow, every prayer, however clumsy, contributes to opening the door of hope. I learned to accept uncertainty, to live with worry without letting it consume my soul, and to believe that even when my eyes couldn't see a miracle, it was still happening. In the days that followed, I practiced that, letting go whenever a feeling of despair came over me. I prayed for my child, but no longer with worry and tension. I looked at my child, held their hand, and told myself that I had surrendered everything to him, the one with power far beyond my own. And strangely, each time I did that, my heart felt lighter, my spirit became stronger, and deep down, I felt a silent strength nourishing both my child and me. From that moment of letting go, our healing journey was no longer just a physical battle against an illness. It became a spiritual journey where faith, hope, and love were nourished through every prayer, every moment of inner peace, and every simple yet meaningful gesture of love. I knew that even though I hadn't seen the ultimate miracle, I had started to live in grace, and that very grace would guide both of us in the days ahead. After long weeks of worry, tension, and despair, I began to notice small changes in my child's health. At first, they were just subtle signs. My child ate a little more, a fleeting smile appeared on their lips. Their eyes were no longer as gloomy as before. Each of these small steps forward seemed gentle, but carried a great meaning. I realized that miracles don't always appear instantly or brilliantly. Sometimes they appear in small details that only those who pay attention will see. I remembered the long nights by the hospital bed when my child was crying in agony, and I felt utterly helpless. At that time, my faith was still shattered, just a faint spark of light in the darkness. But now every positive sign that appeared made me feel clearly that we were not walking alone. I began to understand that God was walking with us, not with loud miracles, but with slow but certain steps. Every time my child smiled, I felt joy welling up in my heart. Every time my child moved more easily, I felt my heart being comforted. I realized that faith is not just about praying or placing hope in the invisible, but also about recognizing God's presence in every small moment, in every positive change, no matter how faint. Those small steps forward also taught me an important lesson. Faith is not always measured by great results or obvious miracles. Sometimes faith is nurtured in those small improvements, in learning how to be patient and feeling grace in every moment of peace. I learned to look at every detail, every gesture of my child, and to realize that life was still thriving, that a miracle was happening every day, every hour. In this process, I was no longer as tense or fearful as before. I learned to let go of worry, to trust in a power beyond human capability, and to find the inner strength to patiently walk with my child on the healing journey. My faith was no longer a theory or a hypothesis. It became a lived experience, proven through every small step my child took, every sign that I hadn't noticed before. Each of those small steps, though slow, was powerful enough to change my heart. I knew that a miracle wasn't just the final result, but also the journey of being together, the peace we found in every moment we had. And every time I looked at my child, I thanked God, not just because their health was recovering, but because I had learned how to trust, how to let go, and how to recognize the faint light in the dark night of despair. One quiet afternoon, as my child was sleeping after a painful and tiring episode, I sat by the bed holding the blanket tightly. Tears started to flow, not from worry or physical pain anymore, but from a deep realization that crept into my soul. We were loved unconditionally. I realized that all the tension, all the fears, all the doubts about myself and life could be put down. In that moment, I felt a strange serenity, as if the whole world could be in chaos, but inside me, a stream of peace was flowing. I began to understand that forgiveness is not only for those around me, but also for myself. I forgave the mistakes, the imperfect decisions I had made, the times I had unintentionally caused my child to suffer. I forgave the things I couldn't control, the illness and the pain, and even my own helplessness. And as I forgave, I felt God's love pouring into my heart, soothing all the mental wounds I hadn't even realized I had. Those tears were not just an expression of emotion, but also of liberation. I felt clearly that even though my child had to go through pain, we could be healed spiritually. That high love didn't exclude difficulties. On the contrary, it was present right in the midst of challenges, like a lamp illuminating the path that we had once seen as the darkest. I remembered the long weeks of despair, the sleepless nights when everything seemed to be falling apart. At that time, I didn't see a way out, didn't realize that peace could come from letting go and trusting. Now, as tears flowed, I realized that every pain could become an opportunity to experience unconditional love. My child and I were not just victims of circumstance, but also people being guided by a higher power, an unbound love, a healing that was beyond all human understanding. That moment changed me. I no longer just looked at the illness or the pain, but saw the miracle in love, in forgiveness, and in learning to live with a serene soul. The tears were no longer a sign of fear, but a testament to the internal change, to a stronger faith in the God who had walked with us. From then on, I began to pray with a grateful heart, not just asking for my child to be healthy, but also to give thanks for the love and guidance I had recognized. I learned that a miracle might not come in the way I wanted, but spiritual healing, the peace and unconditional love, is the foundational step that leads to all other miracles. And in that moment, tears became a deep gratitude, a testament that we had been touched by his light. One quiet afternoon, when everything around me seemed silent, I sat by my child's bed praying with a deeply moved soul. I didn't know what else to ask for, or if my prayers would even be heard. But this time, instead of worrying, I opened my heart completely, holding back no doubt, not trying to control or rationalize. And then something strange happened. There was no bright light, no strange sound, but a deep sense of peace spread within me. All the fear, all the despair that I had held on to for so long suddenly vanished. I felt as if I was lifted up from my worries, from my tears, from the long, sleepless nights and the most desperate moments. My mind became clear, strangely quiet, and in that silence, I realized something I had never understood before. God's love and power are always present, always guiding and protecting us. I felt that this moment was not just temporary peace, but a profound transformation within my soul. I was no longer just a worried, helpless father. I became a father who knew how to trust, how to let go, and how to know that no matter the outcome, we would never be alone. From the bottom of my heart, I felt hope rise, not a vague hope, but a firm hope, nourished by a power beyond everything I had ever believed in. Tears fell again, but this time, they were no longer a sign of pain or disappointment. They were an expression of gratitude, of the realization that even in the darkest despair, light still exists. I began to understand that a miracle is not just a physical result or my child's improved health, but also a spiritual transformation, a peace in the soul, a connection with the higher power. After that moment, I no longer looked at things with fear or worry. Every prayer became lighter and full of hope. Every gesture with my child became more cherished. I learned that faith is not only present when there are immediate results, but also exists in quiet moments, in a deep sense of his power and love. From this profound spiritual moment, our journey changed direction. I no longer just relied on treatment methods or doctors, but I lived each day with the belief that God was with us, supporting and guiding us. My soul was opened, and that very opening became the foundation for the wonderful signs to come, the specific miracles in my child's health and in our lives. After the moments of despair and the first signs of a miracle, I began to realize that life is not just about fighting against illness or fear. It is also a spiritual journey where every step is guided by God's grace. I learned to wake up every morning with a grateful heart, not just because my child was still alive, but because I was given the opportunity to live differently, to feel and practice a faith that I had never had before. I started praying more often, not just asking for good things for my child, but also praying for myself to become more patient, loving, and forgiving. Every prayer became gentle yet deep, like a thread connecting my heart to God's power. I learned to surrender all my worries, all my fears, all my dead-end thoughts. Instead of holding on to fear, I placed my faith that He was holding everything in His hands, and I just needed to follow the light He was guiding me with. In this journey, I also learned to love and forgive, not only my child, but everyone around me. I forgave myself for being so fearful, worried, and out of control. I forgave myself for the times I was not patient enough, and I forgave the things that were beyond my control. I realized that grace not only heals illness or circumstances, but it also heals the soul, soothing the deep wounds in my heart. Learning to forgive was a slow and deep process. I began to forgive those who had hurt me, the harsh words, the unintentional, painful actions. I realized that holding on to resentment didn't help, but only made my soul more chaotic. And more importantly, I also learned to forgive myself for the times I was too worried, for the times I was helpless in the face of my child's illness, for the times I wasn't patient enough, not loving enough. Forgiveness is not about forgetting, but about letting go of the burden, liberating the soul from the chains of the past. Every time I forgave, I felt a sense of relief spreading through my soul. It was as if the heavy stones that used to weigh on my heart suddenly disappeared, replaced by peace and love. I realized that forgiveness is one of the greatest miracles that God gives to humans, not to change others, but to heal ourselves. I learned to walk without being bound by anger, resentment, or regret. This process also made me see more clearly the power of grace. When my heart was freed from the burdens of the past, I could love more fully, care for and nurture my children, family, and everyone around me with a heart that was not calculating or fearful. Forgiveness helped me to see every challenge with a calmer attitude, knowing that what happens has a reason and can be transformed into something good through God's love. I realized that forgiving and being forgiven is the key to moving forward on the journey of faith and life. When I learned to forgive, my soul became more open, more sensitive to grace, and full of faith that everything was in His guidance. My steps were no longer burdened by the past, but were directed toward the future with hope, peace, and spreading love. And it was in that moment of forgiveness that I felt clearly that a miracle was not just the physical healing for my child, but also the healing of the soul, the liberation of the spirit, helping us to live more fully and to cherish every moment we were given. I learned that forgiveness is a precious gift from God so that the heart can be free, and from that freedom, love and grace can flow into everyone's life. As my child began to recover, one small but certain step at a time, I realized that life before and life now were completely different. Things that I once took for granted, waking up in a healthy house, my child's carefree smile, a family meal, were now incredibly precious. I began to learn how to appreciate every moment, not missing any small joy. Before, I lived in a hurry, busy and often worrying about a future that hadn't happened yet, sometimes forgetting to cherish the present. But after the months of facing extreme fear, after the long nights of praying and waiting, I learned to slow down, to enjoy every breath, every laugh, every peaceful moment with my child. Every day became a gift, and I was grateful for every minute given to me. Every step in this new life was not just about caring for my child, but also about nurturing my soul. I learned to observe, listen, and be present with my child more completely. I talked to my child not just to ask about their health, but to truly understand their feelings and thoughts. I realized that the miracle was not just in my child's recovery, but also in how I learned to love and cherish life more. Every day I set aside quiet time to pray, give thanks, and reflect on the moments when God's presence was in my life. I realized that everything I have, my child's health, the peace in our family, the love and connection, is grace. Nothing is taken for granted, and every moment is worth cherishing. Living again doesn't mean returning to the old life, but living with a new awareness. I started to see miracles in the simplest things: the sunlight streaming through the window, the birds singing in the morning, a warm hug from my child, or simply a family meal. I learned to cherish every present moment, to keep my heart open so that faith and hope could continue to grow. Life became more meaningful than ever. I no longer took things for granted, but clearly saw that everything was a gift from Him, a subtle and wonderful grace. From caring for my child and loving my family to how I live each day, I notice God's presence and guidance in every detail. And this very awareness helps me walk each day with joy, peace, and deep gratitude, creating a complete life full of hope and light. As my child recovered and my soul found peace, I realized that my story was not just for my family. The months of despair, the moments of praying in the night, the small signs of a miracle, all of it had created a journey that I believe could bring hope to others. I began to share my story with family, with friends, and gradually with the people I met in support groups or in the community. Each time I told it, my heart resonated with theirs, and I realized that testimonies are not just personal stories, but also a light that guides those who are lost in despair. I didn't force anyone to believe or to follow my way, because a miracle is a personal and profound thing, and everyone will experience it in their own way. When I shared, I remembered the darkest days, the sleepless nights by my child's bed, the feelings of helplessness, and the tears of gratitude when I realized God's presence. I told it all: the fear, the clumsy prayers, the small but miraculous signs, and the profound spiritual moment that changed my soul. I saw the listeners' eyes gradually light up. Faint smiles appeared, and in my heart, hope arose that my story could be a seed for a miracle in their lives. I also shared how I learned to forgive, let go, and live in grace. I talked about realizing the value of every moment, cherishing the things that seemed ordinary, and feeling the miracle in everyday life. Each small story I told was a reminder that, even in the most dark circumstances, light still exists, and it can guide people to find peace and hope. Through sharing, I realized that the light I received was not just a miracle for my child, but also a mission to spread hope. I saw many people regain faith, open their hearts to receive comfort and guidance from God. Sparkling eyes, the returning smiles, and the words of thanks let me know that my story truly had the power to spread. Bringing light to others is not just telling a story, it's living true to my experience, living with an open heart and love. When I do this, I feel a deep joy and peace knowing that every word I share can sow hope, dispel darkness, and help others realize that they are not alone. Life becomes more complete when I know that miracles don't just happen once, but can continue to spread through every story, every act of love, and every step taken towards the light. I understand that if I share this hope, I am not just a recipient of grace, but also a bearer of light, bringing it to the places where it is most needed. When I look back on the entire journey, from the first days of despair when I stood before the doctor's announcement, to the moment my child recovered, I realized one profound thing: his light never goes out. It didn't just appear in the past, wasn't just the miracles that once happened, but it also exists right here, right now, for anyone who is willing to open their heart to receive it. I see that light does not depend on human strength or knowledge. It is present in the quiet moments when we pray, in small acts of love, in the forgiveness we give to ourselves and to others. Even when everything around seems dark, the light is still present, waiting to guide, heal, and bring hope. I remember the long nights by my child's bed, when all the fear and despair were compressed, and I whispered clumsy prayers. At that moment, I wasn't sure if anyone was listening to my prayer, but now I realize that it was that very openness that created the conditions for the light to appear. The small signs, the seemingly random events were all His way of answering, guiding us step by step out of the darkness. The miracle was not just that my child got better. The miracle was also in how I learned to love, to forgive, to cherish every moment, and to live in grace and faith. I realized that those who are suffering, who are lost in despair, can also receive this light if they open their hearts. No special strength is needed, no degrees or profound knowledge, just a sincere heart and a willingness to believe. And from that realization, I felt a deep responsibility to share the light with others. Not to force, not to impose, but simply to tell my story, to share the hope and the living testimony of His healing power. When I do that, I see the light spreading in the eyes of the listeners, in their smiles, in the faith that begins to form in the souls that were once in despair. My life is now full of light, not because I no longer face challenges, but because I know that His light still exists despite the darkness. It reminds me that every day is an opportunity to live with faith, to receive miracles, and to pass the light on to others. The light doesn't go out, it is still present today. It still heals wounded souls, brings hope to those who are lost, and opens new doors for those who are ready to step forward. I know that, as long as we open our hearts to faith and surrender, miracles can always happen, not just in the past, but in the present and in the future. The journey from despair to light has taught me one important thing. No matter how harsh life is, no matter how deep the pain, there is always a light that never goes out. His light. I witnessed a miracle not only in my child's recovery, but also in my soul. The peace, the hope, and the ability to love more completely. The moments that seemed most desperate became doors that opened up a deep faith that I had never experienced before. If you are in the darkness, facing illness, loss, or despair, I want to let you know that you are not alone. He is still at work today, and miracles can still happen to anyone who opens their heart to believe and surrender. No strength is needed, no knowledge is needed, just a heart ready to believe. Allow yourself to pray, let go of your worries, and open your heart to receive grace. Share the light and hope with those around you, because when you trust and experience His healing power, you not only change your own life, but you also become a source of light for others. Start today. Open your heart, trust, and let that light guide you and those you love. A miracle is waiting, and His light never goes out.